Cronos didn't rule with lightning, he ruled with fear of tomorrow. Long before Zeus and the gleaming halls of Olympus, the cosmos was a wild, untamed place. This was the age of the Titans, beings of raw elemental power. They didn't ask for thrones. They took them. Their leader, Cronos, was the perfect example. He was the sun who rose against his own father, Uranus, the sky god. With a sickle forged by his mother, Gaia, he ended his father's tyranny and seized control of the universe. But victory came with a terrible price. A curse whispered from his defeated father's lips. The prophecy was simple and chilling. Just as Cronos had overthrown his father, one of his own children would one day do the same to him. In the world of Greek myths, the future isn't just a possibility, it's a destination. Prophecies aren't warnings you can sidestep. They are chains being forged, links clicking into place, one by one. For a king like Cronos, whose entire reign was built on the memory of his own violent rebellion, this wasn't just a threat, it was a countdown. Every moment of peace, every celebration, every sunrise was tainted by the knowledge that his end was not just possible, but promised. He looked at his wife, the Titaness Rhea, and saw not a partner, but a potential vessel for his own destruction. He saw the future as a hunter, and he was the prey. The paranoia began to fester, twisting his mind. How do you fight an enemy that hasn't been born yet? How do you defeat a destiny that was written into the fabric of the cosmos the moment you seized power? Cronos became a prisoner of his own crown, haunted by the ghosts of his future children. He couldn't trust anyone, not even the family he was meant to create. The fear of losing his throne became more powerful than any love he might have felt. He saw only two paths: surrender his power, or eliminate the threat before it could ever breathe. For a titan who had tasted absolute control, there was no real choice. The throne was everything. He decided he would not be the father his children looked up to. He would be the monster they never had the chance to meet. He would go to war not against a rival army or a foreign god, but against his own bloodline. The plan was as simple as it was horrifying. He would devour his children the moment they were born, erasing them from existence before the prophecy could take root. His wife, Rhea, gave birth to their first child, Hestia, a beautiful goddess, the future keeper of the hearth. But Cronos saw only the first spark of his funeral pyre. He took the infant from Rhea's arms, and without hesitation, swallowed her whole. The act was monstrous, a perversion of nature itself. Next came Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, and finally Poseidon. Each time, Rhea's joy was stolen by her husband's all-consuming terror. She would present her newborn, and he would consume it, imprisoning the young god within his own body. He believed he was outsmarting destiny, that by swallowing his children, he was swallowing the prophecy itself. He thought he was erasing the future, but all he was doing was creating an enemy within. He was feeding a rebellion, nurturing a hatred that simmered in the darkness, waiting for its chance to erupt. Cronos thought he was a king, securing his legacy. In reality, he was just a desperate father, becoming the very monster he feared. And the moment he tried to swallow fate, fate began to fight back. A mother's silence can be the loudest rebellion in myth. We left off with Cronos, the Titan King, haunted by a prophecy that his own child would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father, Uranus. But a prophecy is only a prediction until someone makes it real. And in this story, the key isn't just Cronos' fear, but the quiet strength of his wife, the Titaness Rhea. Rhea wasn't just Cronos' queen. She was the very heart of their new dynasty. She was the goddess of motherhood, of generation, of the gently flowing rhythm of life itself. When she became pregnant with their first child, you can imagine the joy, the hope for a new era. But that hope was quickly overshadowed by Cronos' growing paranoia. He saw his future heir not as a blessing, but as a threat. The first child was born, a beautiful goddess named Hestia. As Rhea held her, the promise of a peaceful future must have felt so close. But Cronos, driven by his terror, saw only the prophecy. He took the child from Rhea's arms and, in an act of absolute control, consumed her whole. This wasn't just a monstrous act, it was symbolic. He wasn't just destroying a child, he was trying to swallow the future itself, to erase any possibility of his downfall. The horror must have been unimaginable for Rhea. Her joy turned to ash, and then it happened again. Demeter was born, then Hera, then Hades, and then Poseidon. Each time, a flicker of hope, a mother's love, only to be extinguished by her husband's insatiable fear. He would take each newborn and consume them, locking them away within himself, a living tomb for his own children. Picture Rhea's world. The halls of their palace on Mount Othries, which should have echoed with the laughter of children, were silent. Her life as a mother became a cycle of creation, followed by immediate, devastating loss. The pain was immense, a constant, knowing grief that hollowed her out. But something happens when a person is pushed to their absolute limit. Grief, when it can't find release, hardens, it transforms. Rhea's sorrow began to curdle into a quiet, steely resolve. Her love for the children she had lost, and for the one she knew was yet to come, became a source of incredible strength. She looked at her husband, the all-powerful king of the cosmos, and saw, not a god, but a tyrant, ruled by fear. She realized she couldn't fight his power with power. She had to fight his fear with cunning. As she felt the stirrings of new life within her once more, a plan began to form in the depths of her despair. This time would be different. This child would live. She could not suffer this loss again. Her heart, broken and reforged, was now a shield. She knew she would have to deceive a god, her own husband, the king of everything. It was a terrifying gamble, but her love for her unborn child was now fiercer than her fear of Cronos. She would save this next one, no matter the cost. Her silent suffering was over. Now, it was time for secret action. The mother's grief was about to become the king's undoing. When power becomes hunger, love becomes a weapon. The future of Olympus began as a secret. While Cronos, the Titan king, believed he had devoured all his children and secured his reign forever, his wife, Rhea, had a final, desperate plan. Her sixth child, a boy named Zeus, would not meet the same fate. The moment he was born, Rhea knew she couldn't let Cronos' paranoia consume another one of her offspring. So, with a heavy heart, she enacted a clever deception. Instead of presenting her newborn son to Cronos, she wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes. Blinded by his fear and arrogance, Cronos didn't even look closely. He snatched the bundle and swallowed it whole, convinced he had once again cheated the prophecy that foretold his downfall. He believed he was invincible, that he had eaten his destiny. But fate doesn't always arrive with the clash of armies or the roar of a conquering hero. Sometimes, it arrives as a whisper, a secret kept in the shadows. Fate is survival against all odds. It is the patience of a mother's love and the slow, inevitable passage of time. While Cronos sat on his throne, complacent in his false victory, Zeus was spirited away to a place beyond his father's reach. He was taken to the remote island of Crete, a world away from the golden halls of Mount Other. There, hidden in a deep cave on Mount Ida, the infant god was kept safe. He was shielded from the all-consuming gaze of his father, protected by the very earths his mother represented. Zeus grew up, not in a palace, but in the wild heart of nature. He was nursed by the goat Amalthea, her milk giving him divine strength. He was guarded by the Caretes, warrior spirits who would clash their spears and shields together whenever the baby cried, drowning out the sound so Cronos would never hear him from the heavens. He was raised in secret, but he was not raised in ignorance. As he grew from an infant into a boy, and from a boy into a young man, he learned the truth of his origins. He was told the story of his brothers and sisters, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, all imprisoned within their father's stomach. He learned of the golden age that Cronos had stolen, a reign built not on justice, but on fear and selfish power. This knowledge forged a fire within him. It was a story of injustice, a tale of a family torn apart before it even had a chance to exist. Every day he trained, his divine powers growing stronger, his resolve hardening like stone. He was the secret heir, the hidden child of prophecy, and the weight of his family's and the world's freedom rested on his shoulders. He was the living embodiment of the destiny Cronos thought he had destroyed. The universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting. On Mount Athris Cronos ruled, believing the prophecy was a defeated relic of the past. He saw no threats on the horizon, no armies marching against him. His power felt absolute. But the greatest threats are often the ones you cannot see. They grow in the darkness, nurtured by the very injustice you created. Zeus was no longer just a hidden child. He had become a symbol of hope, a promise of a new dawn. He was the patient, gathering storm on the edge of the world, ready to return and reclaim what was stolen. He was ready to face his father and fulfill the prophecy that had been set in motion the moment he was born. The son was coming back for the father. The future was about to confront the past, and time itself was about to be broken. Cronos thought the threat was gone because he couldn't see it. Zeus didn't come back for revenge, he came back for the order that was stolen. His return wasn't a stormy entrance filled with rage and lightning. Instead, it was like destiny finally stepping into daylight come, focused and absolutely impossible to stop. He had grown up far from the paranoid court of his father, nurtured by nymphs and protected by the sound of clashing shields that hid his cries. He wasn't just a survivor. He was the living embodiment of a future that Cronos had tried to devour. Zeus represented everything Cronos feared: change, strength he couldn't control, and the inevitable turning of the cosmic wheel. His presence alone was a declaration that the era of fear was over. The universe had held its breath, and now it was time to exhale. The plan was subtle, not a frontal assault. Zeus, disguised or with the help of the Tyenus Metis, depending on the version of the story you hear, presented his father with a special drink. Cronos, ever greedy and unsuspecting of this particular servant, drank it down without a second thought. He probably thought it was just another fine wine to celebrate his unending reign. But this wasn't wine. It was a potent emetic, a concoction designed to undo the past. What happened next wasn't just grotesque, it was symbolic. Cronos' body convulsed, and one by one, he regurgitated the children he had swallowed. First Hestia, then Demeter and Hera, followed by Hades and Poseidon. They emerged, not as infants, but as fully grown gods, unharmed and ready. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a rebirth. It was the universe correcting a terrible mistake, restoring the future that Cronos had tried to erase from existence. The stolen generation was back, and they remembered. This moment was the spark that lit the fuse of the cosmos. The confrontation between Zeus and Cronos wasn't just a family squabble. It was a clash of ideologies. On one side, you had Cronos, representing the old Waya rule built on terror, suppression, and the desperate attempt to stop time itself. He was the embodiment of fear, a king who would consume his own future to protect his present. On the other side, you had Zeus and his siblings. They weren't just fighting for power. They were fighting for the very concept of a future, for a world where potential wasn't a threat to be swallowed, but a promise to be nurtured. This was the old, static, paranoid order versus a new, dynamic, and expensive one. The lines were drawn not just in the heavens, but across the very fabric of reality. The war that followed, the Titanomachy, was inevitable. It was a 10-year struggle that shook the foundations of the world. The older Titans, loyal to their king, rallied to Cronos' side. They were raw power, the brute force that had shaped the early universe. But Zeus was clever. He knew strength alone wasn't enough. He descended into the depths of Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes and the Hundred-Handers, beings his own father had imprisoned out of fear. The Cyclopes, grateful for their freedom, forged legendary weapons: the Thunderbolt for Zeus, the Trident for Poseidon, and the Helm of Darkness for Hades. The Olympians weren't just fighting with passion. They were now armed with creation itself, with tools that could command the sky, the sea, and the shadows. The war wasn't just about deposing a tyrant. It was a necessary, brutal process of world building. Every battle, every strategic move, was about tearing down the old structure to make room for something new. The fall of Cronos wasn't just the end of his reign, it was the end of his entire age. It marked a turning point where the cosmos decided that ruled by fear and paranoia was no longer sustainable. A new kind of order had to be established, one based on a pantheon of different gods with different domains. A system of checks and balances, however flawed it would later become. Zeus's victory wasn't just personal, it was the triumph of a new cosmic principle. The prophecy that had haunted Cronos for his entire life, the one he fought so desperately to prevent, had finally come to pass. Not because he was weak, but because it was simply time. The prophecy wasn't a threat, it was a schedule. When gods go to war, even the world must choose a side. The Titanomachy wasn't just a battle, it was the reordering of reality itself. Mountains were torn from their roots and hurled across the cosmos like pebbles. The seas boiled, and storms, fueled by divine rage, lashed the heavens. The very sky became the battlefield, a canvas for lightning and fire, where ancient beings clashed with a force that could unmake stars. This was not a war of mortals. This was a war for the throne of the universe. On one side stood Cronos and the Titans, beings of Ra, untamed power. They represented the old way primordial strength, instinct, and the brutal assertion of will. Their might was absolute, a force of nature that had ruled since the beginning. They fought with the confidence of kings who had never known defeat, their power shaking the foundations of creation. They were the storm, the earthquake, the unthinking, unstoppable avalanche of the old world. Their power was immense, but it was also predictable, a relic of a time before cunning. On the other side were Zeus and his siblings, the new gods of Olympus. They were not just fighting with strength, they were fighting with purpose. Hades commanded the shadows, a silent, unseen force. Poseidon wielded the fury of the oceans, turning the tides into weapons. And Hestia, Hera, and Demeter brought a new kind of power, the power of unity, of a cause worth fighting for. They were joined by those who saw the future, like Prometheus, who knew that brute force alone could not hold a throne forever. Even some titans, tired of Cronos' tyranny, switched their allegiance, betting on a new dawn. This was the clash of epics, the old guard's blind force against the new generation's strategic brilliance. Zeus, armed with his thunderbolts forged by the Cyclopes, was the heart of this new order. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a leader, a strategist who understood that power must be guided by intelligence. He fought not just to rule, but to establish a cosmos governed by law, not just by might. Each lightning bolt that seared the sky was a declaration. The age of chaos was over. The era of order, of consequence, of a universe where even gods were accountable, was beginning. This was the promise of Olympus. But victory was never guaranteed. Fate had decreed that Cronos would fall, but fate is a tricky thing. It demands payment, it doesn't hand out free victories. For 10 long, brutal years, the war raged. The universe held its breath as power shifted like sand. There were moments when the Titans, with their overwhelming strength, seemed unstoppable. Moments when it looked like Zeus's rebellion would be crushed, his dream of a new world extinguished before it could truly ignite. The cost was staggering. The world groaned under the weight of their conflict, scarred and forever changed by the divine fury unleashed upon it. Slowly, painstakingly, the tide began to turn. Zeus's coalition, a tapestry of gods, titans, and ancient monsters, pushed back against the old king. The war reached its climax in a final, cataclysmic confrontation. It wasn't just a battle of strength, but a battle of ideas. The old order, heavy and brittle with age, finally began to crack under the relentless pressure of the new. Cronos, the great and terrible king who devoured his own children to defy his destiny, found himself facing that very destiny, armed with lightning and a will stronger than his own. The Titans fell, one by one, their immense power not enough to save them from the changing of the age. Their reign ended not with a whimper, but with the roar of a collapsing universe. And when the old king finally lost, the universe Cronos tried to escape the future and became its warning. What happened after Zeus freed his siblings and overthrew their father? The universe was completely The age of the Titans, a reign built on brute force and paranoia, came to a crashing end. They were cast down into Tartarus, the deepest abyss of the underworld, forever imprisoned. From the ashes of this cosmic war, a new order emerged. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades divided the world among themselves. The sky, the sea, and the underworld. The Olympians took their thrones, establishing a more complex, more civilized form of divine rule. But the real story isn't just about who won. It's about why Cronos lost. The central lesson of this entire saga is a timeless one. The obsessive desire for control often creates the very disaster it seeks to prevent. Cronos was so terrified of being overthrown that he turned his own palace into a prison and his family into a source of fear. Every action he took to secure his power only fueled the prophecy. By trying to eliminate any potential challenger, he guaranteed that his one surviving son, Zeus, would grow up with a singular, burning mission: vengeance. He wasn't just fighting for power. He was fighting to liberate his swallowed siblings and avenge his mother's suffering. Cronos' paranoia became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Let's dig into the symbolism, because it's incredibly powerful. The act of devouring his children wasn't just a gruesome detail. It's a metaphor for how fear consumes everything. Cronos didn't just swallow his heirs. He swallowed his legacy. He swallowed the future. He swallowed any chance of a peaceful transition of power. That devouring instinct is paranoia, eating away at your own stability, your relationships, and your very foundation. He saw his children not as continuations of his lineage, but as threats to his existence. And once a ruler, or anyone in a position of power, starts seeing their own future as the enemy, they've already lost. Their legacy is no longer about building something, but simply about holding on. This ancient story resonates so strongly today because we see this pattern play out all the time. Think of it in modern terms: a founder who refuses to let their company evolve beyond their own vision. A leader who stifles talented subordinates because they see them as rivals instead of assets. A political figure who clings to power by any means necessary, undermining the very institutions they're supposed to protect. In every case, treating succession as a threat instead of a responsibility leads to collapse. They create a toxic environment where the only way for new life or new ideas to emerge is through a violent overthrow. Revelli. They become Cronos, devouring their own future, ensuring their downfall is not just possible, but inevitable. They create the resentment that ultimately unseats them. In the end, fate won. But it's crucial to understand that fate in T Stoic wasn't some cruel, external force just waiting to punish Cronos. Fate was the logical consequence of his own choices. It was the natural outcome of his fear, his tyranny, and his refusal to accept the cycle of life that the old must eventually give way to the new. He tried to stop time itself, and time, in the form of his own children, broke free and overwhelmed him. The prophecy wasn't a script written in the stars. It was a psychological profile of a tyrant destined to destroy himself. The more he fought his destiny, the more tightly he bound himself to it. Cronos ate his children and fate still won. If you want more cinematic myths, like and subscribe.